A flashback to a dark and monstrous duty. Siblings wrestle with a crisis of past and present. A young man can't escape the magnetic trauma of his own heritage. Welcome to Hidden Oaks. Don't let it get you down. Really, it's going to seem like a lot, and I do mean a lot. But overall, you can still have a happy life, just like me. You can have a marriage, kids, even go on vacations if you plan it out okay. Obviously, you don't want her to get loose while you're out of town. You'll have a bunch of unhappy government employees on your doorstep. They'll all look the same. Same suit, same sunglasses. Maybe even the same tone of voice. Their support for us in keeping her contained. Whatever you need, they'll get it for you. They'll even pay your mortgage. You don't quite know what it is yet, but you will someday. Let me tell you, Simon said. He was tall, pale, with short spiked hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a tight, unassuming face. He was wearing a white dress shirt with black slacks. He didn't like to stand out at all, not even for a mere moment, and his appearance echoed this sentiment to a boring perfection. Simon was sitting completely straight in the booth. He'd had perfect posture his entire life. Whenever the weight of the woods creeped into his skin and down his throat like a living wedge of slime, he would sit up and stare at nothing. So she knew far away in her prison, watching him like a hawk, that her connection to him wasn't dragging him down into any web-forge abyss that she could create. Now then, enough talking business. Are you hungry, son? Simon said. He scanned the paper menu on the table in front of them. They were sitting in a booth at the only diner between Richfield and New Brighton that was open this time of day. It was shortly after 3 a.m. The air smelled like bacon, pancakes, and cigarettes. The only people swinging the glass door open at that time of morning were truckers and delivery men, who immediately staggered to the metal counter to sit down on the ruby-colored stools lined beneath it. You can have whatever you want. Cheeseburger, fries, milkshake, BLT, waffles. Whatever you want, he said with a smile. The boy was short, pale, with dark hair that was matted with sleep. Simon had tried to run a comb through it this morning, but the boy started to close his eyes and fall asleep as he did it. His son was 10 years old. He was thin, short, and quiet. He didn't want him to have this duty, but he was his only child. There was no one else in the bloodline to pass these curses on to. Simon had been the oldest in his family, so he got all the baggage, before he even knew that it existed. It took them just a half hour to eat their food. Simon wished it had taken longer. He wasn't looking forward to introducing her to his son. He knew that it would change everything for him, even if it didn't sink in right away. Everything he'd learned in school would have a hint of doubt to it. The lessons life could offer would be eternally questioned. Simon could remember when it sunk in what he was witnessing and controlling. Even now, years after learning about her, he still had those moments of panic, like he was living in a bad dream that she had constructed for him. Focusing on the present helped, but there were plenty of times that Simon would lose his breath if he remembered how much pressure was on him for containment. When they left the diner, it was still dark. It was spring. The air had an edge of winter still lingering about it. They could see their breath as they walked down the steps and across the gravel to the car. Behind them, the diner gleamed in the murkiness like a stainless steel jewel, a beacon of light amongst the walls of shadow that seemed to be encroaching from all edges. The windows were clear and calm before the glowing pink neon letters that said, Zip's Diner. As they walked, Simon stopped his son and pointed to the air around the eyebrow of a building. You see how the shadows look darker and thicker? That is her starting to awaken. She'll play games with us, and illusions are some of her favorites," he said. His son just nodded his head and yawned. A semi shot down the highway just past the diner. Its mechanical bellow jolted them both. "Anyways, let's get going," Simon said. Simon's son could not remember if he'd ever ridden in the front seat of the car. Simon drove a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air with 2 doors. His father was an accountant at Dayton's in downtown Minneapolis. He spent a small fortune on this car. It was candy apple red with white streaks over its tires. There were a few other models his dad wanted, but he insisted that this car was for his other job, so he could get whatever he wanted free of cost. By the end of the morning, his son would know exactly why. The drive to New Brighton was quiet and long. There weren't many illuminations along the road, just occasional yellow jolts of passing headlights, distant gas station signs, and lonely streetlights bent over the road like they were tall, skinny giants looking for something. The inside of the car smelled like mint and some sort of chemical. His father kept the interior impeccably clean. He said it was sort of a company car, but he couldn't say which company it belonged to. His son knew it wasn't Dayton's, and that was all. The boy tried to stay awake in the darkness. His father hummed slightly as the engine growled along. Simon had made this trip many times before in the dawn. He knew where to accelerate and where to brake without much hesitation. The boy was almost fully asleep when the car came to a screeching halt, throwing him forward into the dashboard. "Fuck!" his dad yelled at the steering wheel. The boy had never heard his father swear before. He stared at him, panting in the dark. "I can't believe I was this careless. I was only a few days late, but she was able to do this," he said. He rubbed his knees slightly and started to rock back and forth. The boy started to cry a little. He was seeing his father become someone else. Simon looked over at the boy and blinked rapidly to snap himself back into reality. Sorry, I just got upset." Simon took a deep breath and gnawed on his bottom lip a little bit. "You see, son, if we're late on the rights, she'll start to wriggle free. She's always looking for an angle on us. You've got to be diligent. I'm just mad at myself, really. I took a few days off and I lost track of it," Simon said. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with a navy blue handkerchief. "God, you'd think I'd be more diligent in trying to contain her. You'd think it'd be easy to remember, but you'd be surprised how easily life gets in the way," Simon said. He wrapped his arm around the boy and pulled him close in an awkward hug. "It's worth it, though. Every bit of it," he said. Simon opened the door and stepped out onto the road. Everything around them was dark, sunken, like the road had led into some pit that crawled up around them. The air had a rotten smell like pond water, and there was no sound. You couldn't separate the sky from the ground. It was as if they were locked in some sort of bottle of dark ink. Simon sighed and kicked the tire of his car. The boy stepped outside and quickly scampered around the car to hold his father's hand. Simon smiled and pulled him tight. "It's okay, son, I'm here. She can't hurt us in an illusion. Her spells are incomplete. They're just meant to slow us down or distract us," Simon said, pointing at the shadows all around them. Something sensed his movement in the darkness and swam in the air above them. It was a lighter shade than the rest. It was flowing, cloaked in tattered fabric and shaped like a man. Its form had shoulders, a head, but anything below it was lost in sinuous shrouds. The only real feature they could discern in that inky trap that surrounded them was a row of round, obscene teeth curled into a white grin. It was cartoonish, unbelievable, and haunting. When the boy caught sight of it, he nearly peed himself. Simon pulled him closer as it weaved above them. "Ignore it. I know it's hideous. That's one of her pets. They're only an issue if someone comes back to life in a strange way, not anything to be concerned about. We just need to focus on containing her. All the bells and whistles are just distractions," Simon said. He put his son back into the car and reached into the back seat, into a long wooden box. It was smooth and covered in strange etchings. They were curled and faint across its surface, as if whoever did the designs was afraid of carving too deep. Simon stopped and nodded at the box, then his son. "Actually, buddy, why don't you grab it for me?" Simon said. The boy reached over and grabbed the box. It was heavy and a little slippery in his small, sweaty hands. When he touched it, a flood of images broke through his eyes. They included an open field with a river and a cobblestone bridge hanging over it. There was a forest, too, a narrow path winding through it with a ring of pond water surrounding an overgrown island of sorts. Then the scenes were gone. His father was now holding it, but the boy couldn't remember handing it to him. "They'll get easier, son. They'll get easier," Simon said. He reached down along the box to a brass latch that marked the lid. He reached his hand back and spit on the fingertips. "It needs to know it's one of us," he said. Simon winked at his son and smiled. "We're special, bud." The box opened without a sound. The boy was expecting some sort of jeweled gun or sword with the way she had been described to him, but instead all he saw was a small lantern. It looked gold or brass, with a flattened lip of metal on its top and bottom. Etched onto each petal were more etchings, in some language he had never seen before. "Always have to be careful with this, son. We only have one," Simon said, grabbing the lantern by the wiry handle on its top. He stepped out of the car. The abyss was compacting all around them. The road, grass, and pavement were being silently devoured by curls of colorless gloom. "Watch this," he said. He set the lantern on the road. Simon dug into his pocket and pulled out some matches. He struck one without looking at it and lit it in a quick flourish. The curled glass grew into an illuminated green. It was like a jade sun was locked inside. Beams scattered into the darkness, and the shadows started to ooze away like a backwards tide. "Oh, I see. It's time to pass it on," a voice laughed from the deep. Simon spun around as the dark crawled away. The boy noticed his father sweating. His white shirt was completely soaked. Around the car, the woods, grasses, and trees returned in the dim morning light. "He looks like you at that age, Simon." "He's beautiful," the voice said. The boy couldn't decipher it. The tone was both human and animal, a mixture of growls and words. The boy sunk into the front seat further, like he wanted to hide inside the upholstery. "Oh, he's shy. How different than you, Simon," the voice echoed. The boy sat up straighter and leaned towards the dashboard. He didn't like how the voice just assumed things. Words were waiting in his throat. His lips started to form a letter. But then his father hissed at him from the road. "Don't you dare talk to her. Don't let her in. Don't do it," Simon snarled. The boy covered his mouth with his hands in surprise. It felt like something was inside the car with him. He could not tell exactly what, but some sort of presence directly behind him, hanging over his shoulders. His eyes shot upwards to the rearview mirror behind him. A shape was behind him on the seat. He could not see any details, but he knew something was peering at him. Then his father flashed the lantern into the front window in a flourish, and the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The boy started to weep. He'd pissed himself, too. Simon jumped inside the car and wrapped his arms around his son. "It's okay. It'll get easier, son. It'll get easier. I was scared too at first. You just can't talk to her. You can't give her the opportunity to know you. It emboldens her. You don't want that," Simon said. After a few minutes, he picked up the lantern on the road. He rolled down his window and started to drive, holding the beacon of verdant light outside the vehicle. The world continued to change all around them. The sky broke apart in shards of shadowy rock, like the inner dome of hell had fallen. They vanished before hitting the streets and grasses, evaporating into the reality around them. They were silent in their avalanches. The boy expected the echoes of rubble or debris, but the emptiness between the sound waves was far more deafening. This image was not as terrifying as what retreated on the road in front of them. It was like they were chasing a living cloud of darkness. It casually glided in front of them like some sort of parade float, just moving fast enough to keep some distance. Below the rolls of shadow and gloom was what looked like a hand. It was massive, stitched over with bits of cobweb and bark. The flesh was bright red almost and bubbled over like it had grown over itself thousands of times. The appendage was still thin though, and bones were visible. On the hand were 6 long fingers. At their ends were fine nails like needles, only they were white as virgin snow. They left 6 dents in the dirt as the abomination fled. Then the boy blinked and it was gone. He thought he heard some voices and a strange song, but he couldn't be sure. They were parked outside the small forest. They were on a dirt road. New Brighton had barely been developed. It still had empty lots and country fields as its population. The woods they were next to were small, short, and overall unexciting. It was spring, so the trees were more brown than green, and there were gaps between the branches and trunks. In the forest there were no paths. There was only a small pond which formed a brown ring around an island of reeds and swamp. "You stay here this time, Simon. I'll be right back. Next moon, I'll bring you inside with me," Simon said. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small red book with old yellow pages inside. He opened the door and held the lantern next to his shoulders. The light had changed from the blinding green to a sharp red. "Don't go," the boy said. He scooted over to hug his dad. Simon smiled. He kissed his son on the forehead and winked at him. "Don't worry, son. I'll always be here to protect you from the monsters," he said. Hello?
Hi. Oh, is it early there?
Same 2 hours earlier as ever.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I figured I might hear from...
So, you know.
Hmm? No, I just mean...
Whatever. Look, Dad had a heart attack.
Oh,
That's it? Oh?
I... What do you want me to say?
I was hoping you'd say you'd come home.
I am home.
You know what I mean.
Yes, I know what you mean, but I can't. I'm going up to the Sierras tomorrow.
You can do that anytime.
I really can't. I have responsibilities here now. I'm not just on one big vacation, you know?
Don't put words in my mouth. I never said that.
You never... Fine. You just heavily imply it. Every time you need me to come clean up the wreckage of some family bullshit.
He's in the hospital. That's not bullshit. He's your dad, too.
Yeah, longer than he was yours. You never... Forget it.
Oh no, go ahead. Every time you have to deal with this family bullshit, the same half stories of how everything's Dad's fault, how he's always so awful to Mom, how...
He was awful to Mom. You didn't... Well, I'm glad you never saw it, but I did. Look, he wouldn't even... I'm sure he's glad you're there, right?
I don't know if he even knows I'm here. He's been asleep all night. They woke him up for a few minutes, but the way he looked at me, he was so confused. And he looked so weak.
Hey, I'm sorry. This sucks, I know, but me being there wouldn't do any good, trust me. The last thing he needs is a fight, and all we ever do...
So don't fight. What do you think he's gonna do? Take a swing at you? Hooked up with all those tubes and machines? Can't you just be here for him?
For him? No.
It's Dad. He needs you.
He really doesn't.
Well, I need you. There. Is that what you wanted me to say? Jesus, you have to be some kind of hero.
You don't need me either. And when have I ever...
Oh, right. So it takes me a little longer than we said to pay you back for.
I don't care about that. Have I ever even brought that up? I wanted to help you out. Look, I know I bitch about things falling to me, but it's not about that either.
Isn't it? A minute ago, it was every time you need me to come home to fix everything. And now it's not about that. Fine, you show up or you write a check every now and then, but who's actually visited him at all in this however many years? You don't fix this family, you run away from it.
There, see? Last thing you need is me. Getting in the way.
Don't do that. You always do that.
Do what? You just said you don't need me to fix anything. Dad sure as hell doesn't need me. There's no point. Look, later, when there's hospital bills and stuff.
You just said it's not about money.
You're right.
Just, please, can you come home? For me?
For you?
We used to lean on each other. All three of us. I shouldn't have to stand here alone. You can't both be gone.
I'm not gone. And neither is...
I can't lean on him. Not now. Someone's got to have it together, and I'm not holding it together. Okay? I can't do this alone. And please, don't go into that you had to go through this with Mom. I know. And I know it wasn't fair. And I know you were young at the time. Well, say something.
You've grown up. You can handle this.
No, it's...
Overwhelming. I know, and I'm sorry. I feel bad that you have to go through this, but you do. I even feel bad that I don't feel worse about Dad. He burned a lot of bridges, including mine. How he didn't burn yours, I'll never understand. But good for you. Whatever kind of magical big heart you've got, that's going to be more helpful to you than I would be.
I stopped by the house last night.
Okay.
He had all that stuff out again.
Oh, no.
That big, weird smelling journal and the...
Stop. Not this again.
Come on. You said it yourself. You knew I was going to call. You could sense it too. When his heart...
I never said that.
You don't have to say it. I sense it, and so do you. Something is going on with...
Would you stop? It's not a sense. It's nonsense. It's not even that. This family is mentally ill. You know that, right? Dad, you, me, we're all... None of that park stuff is real. You want my help? Here it is. Throw that shit away. All of it.
I'm not going to.
Burn that stupid, stinky book and stick those creepy, misshapen bones in a trash smasher. Get rid of it. Hell, burn the house down with all that stuff inside.
Are you done?
No! After all that bullshit is gone, you find yourself a therapist. A real one. And you send me the goddamn bill. And if you bring Dad with you, fine. Just don't tell me.
We're not crazy.
Oh, yes, we are. Let's call a spade a spade. We are sick. We are sick in the head. Dad was sick in the head his whole miserable life, and he made everybody around him miserable too. Then he passed it on to his miserable kids, so we'd be so busy hearing pretend fucking alien language coming from the park across the street that we wouldn't remember all the other fucking reasons why we should hate that old son of a bitch. Did I say something funny?
No. You're hurt. And you're angry.
No shit.
I can sense it.
Oh my God, stop. You just listened to me scream about being hurt and angry. Hearing is a sense. Thoughts and reasoning, yeah, that's sense. But telepathically grabbing someone's feelings or suddenly catching a whiff of an unhygienic journal that's 2,000 miles away? That's a mental disorder. Do you understand that? It's not real.
You've always known.
I mean it. Find a psychiatrist. You're delusional.
I called you, begging for help, and are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious. What do you want me to do? Dance around it for another generation? I'm not calling you names, okay? I'm delusional too. You, me, our sorry excuse for a father. Whatever it is, we've all got it.
Where is this coming from? Are you in therapy?
You know I'm in therapy.
Yeah, but for this?
What else would it be for?
Can we at least talk about it in person?
Don't.
Okay, well, you know the situation here. One crazy person looking after another. I just have to ask one last time. Please, will you come home?
No. The phone jangled harshly as Eddie slammed the receiver back onto its cradle. The sound continued to resonate through the small apartment as he stood there, his head resting on his arm as he leaned against the wall. It pained him to argue with his little sister. He hated when it came to this because he knew the way he reacted only hurt her, and that was something he never wanted to do. But there was a lot more underneath everything. He was hurting too, had been for many years. And hurting people hurt people, as his therapist sometimes told him. Eddie had always been pretty physically average. He was not tall but not short, neither thin nor fat nor buff, and had short dark hair that wasn't really black and wasn't really brown either. It was just dark. He always thought he could easily be cast as guy number 2 in a film. He could also easily be lost in a crowd, and that was something that made his life easier. For a long time he had been running from his past, and being able to be lost and not easily remembered helped him in this. Emotions surged through him as he stood there. He was furious at his father for everything he had done, for hurting his mother and sister, for putting them all through his stupid bullshit. He was frustrated by his sister's naivety and by her attempt to guilt him into something that she knew was infuriating for him. He was angry at his dead mother, always wishing that she had left their father sooner, before the worst of it started. He was angry at himself for bottling up his feelings, for running away. He knew he did things to help his little sister, like helping her with money for school or when things were tight. But he also knew a lot of those things were done out of shame. A shame that felt even stronger when he did them because he knew he could be there to support her in more important ways, rather than out here in Los Angeles, running from it all. There was also a part of him that still loved his father. It wasn't all terrible. He did have fond memories as well. Most of the time when his resentments were in check, he pitied his father. He knew there was mental illness involved, and he couldn't just ignore that in the big picture of how everything turned out. He knew he struggled with it too, and how could he accept it within himself and ignore it in someone else? He knew that rarely was anyone a true villain, and had become very good at giving the people around him the benefit of the doubt when he could. Recognizing that made him angry at himself for completely shutting himself off to the old man, and for not even considering being at his side when he was sick or dying or whatever the fuck it was that was going on right now. The rage, the sadness, the self-pity, the doubt, the uncertainty, the shame, the cognitive dissonance of everything boiled up, surged to the front of his mind, and he stood back from the wall. As he did so, the phone began to ring again. He lashed out, tore the whole thing from the wall, and with a yell threw it across the kitchen where it smashed into some cupboards and fell on the floor with another, yet this time a more defeated, dinging of its internal bell. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. There were little cuts where the sharp plastic edge of the phone had caught him when he tore it free of the wall. He didn't feel any pain, but there was a small trickle of blood coming from the one near his thumb. He was fuming. His heart was racing, his breathing heavy and rapid. He had worked for more than a year now with his therapist with coping mechanisms for these very moments, and before he tore apart more of the house, he tried one. He began taking slow, deep breaths, counting to 5 as he inhaled, 5 as he held his breath, and 5 as he exhaled. He closed his eyes while he did it. In less than 2 minutes, he already felt calmer. He walked to the window in the apartment's small living room and gazed out at the city. He didn't see anything he was looking at, however. His vision was internalized. He had to figure out what to do, and he knew right away that he still wasn't ready to confront all this yet. Regardless of the shame he felt from running away, it was just too much. She had said Dad wasn't even conscious yet, so he wasn't even going to notice anyway. She had said that she is the one that really needed him there, but Eddie wasn't ready for that either, to walk back into that old life. He did so much, stayed so busy to keep it out of his mind. He hadn't even been back to the state of Minnesota for years. Besides, he was going up north into the Sierras this weekend. The first chance he was going to have to relax, enjoy nature, and be alone in the mountains for a bit. And that's when he decided. He was going to go now, not tomorrow. He still had some time. She didn't need him there immediately anyway. What the hell was he going to do? He wasn't a doctor or a lawyer or a fucking mortician, however this all ended up working out. So he would leave today. He had to just get away, to think about it all. Then he made up his mind about how he would deal with this latest round of what he thought of as old man bullshit. He had to call work and let them know he wasn't going to come in today. Something had come up, family emergency. They would understand. He was the service manager at an independent Jaguar dealership in a Los Angeles suburb. How much would they really miss him for an extra day anyway? Besides, he almost never took a day off. In fact, he was the one that always came to the rescue when they were short-staffed or needed people to fill extra hours. He always exceeded expectations on his reviews. He knew it would be fine. He had smashed his phone, though. He walked back into the kitchen and picked the phone up off the floor. The phone had a few scuff marks, but otherwise looked fine. The plug that he had torn from the wall in his tantrum still looked intact, and when he clicked it back into the phone jack and picked up the receiver, there was a dial tone. A bit staticky, but it was there. Geez, these things are really well made, he thought as he called work. He spoke with his boss, who was understanding, and told him to do his best to rest, and to let him know over the weekend if he needed more time off before coming back in on Monday. So that was that. He already had his things packed. He always packed early when he was going out of town. He spent a few hours getting things in order, doing a little housekeeping before he left. His anxiety would be worse while he was gone if he knew he had left the little things for himself to finish after he came back from a trip. And right now, he needed to be able to relax. He needed to have his mind focused on what his sister had called about this morning. After the trash was wrangled up and brought out, the dishes cleaned, and a handful of other odds and ends completed, he felt that he was ready to go. He grabbed his backpack and duffel bag, threw them into the back seat of his Ford Contour, and headed north out of the city. It was 9.5 hours of driving, on the 5 the whole way, from Los Angeles to the Shasta Trinity National Forest, where he had reserved his campsite. For the most part, he just drove. He stopped a few times along the way for gas, lunch, to use the restroom, but everything in between was just silent driving. No radio, no one to talk to. Just Eddie and Eddie's thoughts. He relived a lot of painful memories on that drive. He thought again of how little anyone needed him to be back in Minnesota. How it would only make him angry to go. The more he thought of it, the more he decided he might take his boss up on the offer of more time. He might consider spending another few days up in the mountains, hell, maybe a week. But most of all, he was sure as fuck that he was not going back to Minnesota. His sister would forgive him. She was tough, too, and had good friends, and they would be there for her. He wasn't going. He was finally able to start to relax after he had made this decision. Time passed. Eddie drove. And so it was that the sun was setting as he drove deeper into the mountains amongst the tall pine forests. The forests and the highway through them were already dark. He had another 30 minutes or so to drive before he got to the campground that he knew well. Eddie used the parks in the Sierras frequently as a way to unwind his mind, and he got up here several times a year. His mind was on autopilot as he drove, just waiting for the familiar sharp curve in the road, the steep incline, then the sign on the left for his campground and turnoff. He didn't even have to think about the drive. And he wasn't thinking about the drive. His mind had turned back to the stinky old book and other weird things his sister had said their father had out in the house when she went over there yesterday. Things that he remembered well from childhood. things that gave him some of the most troubled memories. Not because they were particularly associated with any of the beatings, the emotional abuse, the drinking, or the yelling, but because it was his father's fascination with the park and the supernatural that were at the heart of his fears about his own mental well-being, and his sister's. Suddenly, as he came easily around a sharp curve, his headlights swept onto something right in the middle of the road. It was moving toward him. He swerved to the side of the road, scraping the guardrail and coming to a stop just in time to avoid striking the man that was running toward him. In the split instant that Eddie saw him, he saw that the man looked disheveled and dirty and had a panicked look on his face. "Holy crap, talk about crazy people," Eddie shouted out loud as he got out of the car to look back. "Hey, you fuck! What are you even—" He trailed off as his brain processed more of the situation. He could no longer see the jogger, but he could hear his screams through the darkness. A shiver ran down his spine. He had never heard screams that real, that terrified before. He swept his head forward, and as he looked the way he had been driving, he saw the bloody footprints of the man on the yellow stripes in the center of the road. "What the hell is going on here?" Eddie thought. "I better go check on this guy. He is clearly not okay." His mind completely on the current situation now, relatively calm but with a panicky, nervous anxiety that he couldn't really define underlying it all. He got back into the driver's seat and started forward. He would drive up the road to where it straightened out and come back and find the guy, see if he needed some medical attention or something. He had no way of calling the police, at least not without a 40-minute drive back to the nearest town. And the guy could be dead by then, if he did that. But as he turned the corner, something was immediately different. He felt a sudden jolt in his surroundings. He saw the familiar brown sign up ahead that he was expecting to be for a national forest campground. Then, when he slowly pulled up to it, to where he was going to turn around, everything else, the jogger, his sister, his dad, his childhood, left his mind. He was paralyzed. He stopped his car and stared, mouth agape, at the sign for Hidden Oaks Park. The same sign that was down the street from his childhood home all those years ago. Minutes passed. When he was finally able, he turned his head. The pine forests of the high Sierras were gone. He was in the suburbs, down the street from where he grew up in New Brighton, Minnesota. He didn't know how it had happened, but he had come home. The Hidden Oaks podcast is a collaboration between Patrick W. Marsh, Robert Dawn, and Owen Swerkstrom. Lanthorn Light was written by Patrick W. Marsh, Come Home by Owen Swerkstrom, and I'm Not Coming Home by Robert Dawn. The voice of Hidden Oaks and of Eddie, performed by Robert Dawn. The voice of the sister, performed by Robin Sand. Original music composed and performed by David Schwartz. Find more of his works at dtschwartz.com. Produced by Robert Dawn, Owen Swerkstrom, and Patrick W. Marsh. You can find out more online by visiting us at hiddenoakspodcast.com or by finding us on Twitter at Hidden Oaks Pod, as well as Facebook and Instagram at Hidden Oaks Podcast. Hidden Oaks is an Ironfield independent production. Thank you for listening. And until next time.